Michael Turner had just set foot back in town at sunset when he saw a strange boy standing right on the tracks, a train screaming down with brakes grinding like steel claws. Michael didn't think. He just dove and yanked the kid out of death's reach in the last split second, the whole town frozen in shock. But when the dust and smoke hadn't even cleared, Michael noticed something off. The boy carried old, troubling wounds on his body, and tucked inside his clothes was a set of shady papers stamped with the name Victor Hale. Why was this child left standing there, and how was Victor's shadow already tied to him from the very start? The late light spread across the old station like a faded blanket, catching on cracked cement and rusted beams. Michael Turner walked slow, his boots dragging across the stained platform. He'd just come from a small bar at the end of Main Street, where the smell of whiskey still clung to him and the ghosts of old conversations rattled in his head like loose change. The sound of a train horn drifted in from a distance, long and mournful, and it pulled him backward to another sunset years ago, halfway around the world in the desert of Iraq. Back then it wasn't a whistle, it was the metallic scream of an ambush, engines grinding, steel exploding. Michael shut his eyes for a second, and the heat of memory burned sharp in his chest. But when he opened them, there was no desert, no convoy, only the near-empty station and a few scattered souls waiting for the last train of the day. He was about to turn away, to let the shadows have their way with the station, when his eyes caught something at the edge of the tracks. A boy. Thin, scrappy, his hair tangled, his coat hanging off him like it belonged to someone else. Both arms were wrapped around a canvas bag that had seen better years. He stood right at the lip of the tracks, leaning forward like the rails had him under a spell. His eyes were blank, no spark, no sign. He heard the whistle screaming louder with each second. Michael's stomach dropped. He didn't think his body just moved. His boots scraped hard against the concrete, lungs filling with fire as he ran. The rails shook. The train was bearing down fast, brakes grinding with a sound that could split bone. Folks on the platform gasped. One or two shouted, but none of them moved closer. They froze, fear pinning them where they stood. Michael had been in this place before, just under a different sky. In Iraq, there was no time to think either, no room for doubt. He remembered dragging a brother in arms out from under a collapsed wall just seconds before a buried charge blew the whole block apart. That same current surged through him now, hot and sharp, driving him forward. He yelled, "Hey, move!" But the boy didn't twitch. The horn drowned everything. For a split second the world slowed, the roar of the train swelling in his ears, the ground trembling under his boots. Michael threw himself forward, arms wrapping tight around the small body. He pulled hard, momentum carrying them both across the concrete. They hit the ground as the train blasted past, a wall of steel and heat screaming inches from their faces. The rush of air slapped grit against Michael's skin, burned in his lungs. The screech of brakes roared so loud it rattled teeth. Michael hit the platform hard, his body taking the shock. His arm curled instinctively, keeping the boy shielded against his chest. In that chaos, he felt it, the ragged breath of the child, shallow and quick, the pounding of a tiny heart against his ribs. The boy's eyes shot open, wide with terror, but he didn't cry. No tears came. He just shook, his body convulsing in tiny jerks, like fear had been stored up inside him for years, and now it had no way out. The train stretched on, car after car rattling by, until finally the noise faded, leaving behind only the stink of hot iron and diesel smoke. The whole platform was silent. People stared, their mouths open, their bodies stiff. Nobody seemed to believe what they had just witnessed. Michael pushed himself up, his arm bleeding where it had scraped the concrete, but he ignored it. He knelt in front of the boy, both hands steadying the small shoulders. He looked straight into the young face. "What's your name?" His voice came out low, rough. The boy parted his lips, and a thin whisper escaped, almost too soft to hear. "Daniel." Then his body gave way, his eyes rolling back as he fainted right there in Michael's arms. Michael lifted the boy carefully, pressing the small frame against his chest. Around them, the crowd murmured. A woman whispered, "Where'd that kid come from?" Someone else muttered, suspicion in their tone, like Michael himself had brought the boy here. Their stares cut sharp, heavy with doubt. The last echo of the train died out, rails still humming faintly. Michael stood, holding Daniel close, and the weight of the moment sank into him. He had pulled lives out of death before, but this wasn't war. This wasn't about uniforms and orders. This was a boy, alone on a set of tracks, staring down a death he didn't flinch from, and Michael had no idea why. No idea who had left him there or what shadows followed him. The silence on the platform pressed down, every eye fixed on him, and deep in his gut Michael knew one thing. The train was just the first warning. Whatever had nearly claimed this child's life was only the beginning, and the real storm was still coming. Michael carried Daniel in his arms, walking away from the train station, under the suspicious eyes of those who still lingered. Nobody came forward. Nobody offered a hand, just that heavy silence hanging over him like a sentence not yet spoken. He moved down the dark street, shoulders squared, as if the whole weight of the town's doubt pressed against his back. His old wooden house sat on the edge of town, shingles peeling off the roof, steps leaning like they could give way any moment. It was the only place he had, the only roof he trusted enough to bring the boy to. At the very least, he needed to know where the kid had come from. He laid Daniel down on the busted old sofa, then crouched to study the pale little face. The boy's skin looked drained, lips faintly trembling. Michael fetched a bowl of water and a clean cloth, his hands unsteady as he washed away the dirt and blood from the scrapes along the boy's arms and knees. But it wasn't just new scrapes he found. There were scars, old ones, dug in deep, the kind you don't get from tripping on a track. They told a story Michael knew too well. This child had lived through more than a 10-year-old should ever carry. Anger welled up inside him, mixed with a pity that burned, the same way he used to feel when he'd seen children wandering the rubble in Fallujah, eyes empty from things they should never have witnessed. When he slid the canvas bag free from Daniel's small hands, Michael found crumpled papers inside. He smoothed one out, brow furrowing. A birth certificate, torn at the corner, the names of the parents rubbed nearly blank like somebody wanted them gone. Another sheet carried a red stamp and an odd signature, looked like some adoption paper but not one that would hold up anywhere official. Michael turned them over and over, suspicion rising sharp. He glanced at Daniel still unconscious, lips twitching as if he were muttering something in a dream, sweat beading on his forehead. Michael dragged a chair closer, sat with his chin resting heavy on his fist, eyes tracking the boy's shallow breathing. The house was still, the only sounds the wind slipping through the cracks and the old clock ticking out the seconds. That loneliness he'd lived with for years seemed to swell now, pressing tight in the small room. He thought back to the day he came home, how nobody in town had wanted to mention his name, how he'd ended up just another old veteran hiding away in a rotting house. And now here was a boy he didn't know lying on his sofa, and every bone in his body told him this wouldn't end simply. He stood, walked to the table, spread the papers out in a line. He shined a flashlight across them, squinting. On the back of the birth certificate, scrawled in pencil, was a note, "Track 17, do not expose." Michael's brow knotted, heart picking up speed. That wasn't random. It pointed straight back to the rails, the very place he'd found Daniel. The boy hadn't just been standing there by accident. A low moan broke the silence. Daniel stirred, then jerked awake, eyes wide with fear. He tried to sit up, but his hands shook too much to hold him steady. Michael leaned forward, voice rough but calm. "You're safe now. Don't be scared." But the boy didn't answer. He shrank back into the corner of the sofa, gaze fixed, not on Michael, but on the papers spread across the table. That look, it wasn't the eyes of a normal child. It was raw fear, tight with desperation, like he already knew those papers were the danger itself. Michael eased the papers down, careful not to spook him more, and stepped closer. He opened his mouth to ask a question, but before the words came, a sound thudded against the porch outside. Sharp, heavy. Someone had dropped something on the steps. Michael froze, instincts from the battlefield snapping awake. He tilted his head, listening. Footsteps light, but real, fading away into the night. He moved quick, yanked the door open. The porch was empty. Only the dark street stretched out, quiet as stone. But right there on the worn wood step sat a thick envelope. No name, no address. Just a bold red seal stamped dead center. Michael crouched, staring at the mark pressed into the paper. His chest tightened, breath going shallow. He knew that symbol. Everyone in town did. It was Victor Hale's. The next morning, Michael hadn't closed his eyes when a pounding rattled the front door, heavy as hammers. He stepped out, opened it, and found two local cops in faded uniforms, their faces tight. The taller one spoke first. "We've had a report that a child is being held here illegally. We need to come inside." Michael froze, his eyes flicking to Daniel standing in the corner of the living room, his face white as paper. A low fire rose in Michael's chest, but he kept his voice steady. "That boy was nearly hit by a train yesterday. I brought him back to take care of him. There's no kidnapping here. All over." The officers didn't care for explanations. One pushed past, scanning the room, and spotted the bundle of papers on the table. He snatched them up, waving them. "What are these? Where did you get them? Why is this birth certificate torn and erased?" Suspicion laced every word, their eyes already painting him guilty. Michael swallowed hard, his jaw flexing. "They were in his bag. I only saw them myself last night. Maybe you ought to ask where this kid came from before you start throwing charges around." But it didn't stop there. Outside, a crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the flashing lights of the cruiser. Faces full of curiosity and judgment pressed close to his porch. Voices rose, sharp and cruel. "That crazy vet's kidnapped a kid. Told you, he came back from war messed up in the head." Each word cut deep, sharper than shrapnel. Michael had lived with their cold shoulders before, but this was different. This was accusation, open and bare, turning him from a man who'd saved a life into a criminal in their eyes. One officer moved toward Daniel, reaching to pull him away. Michael stepped in fast, his frame blocking the boy. His eyes burned with a warning barely contained. No one touches him. He's still scared out of his mind. You want to follow procedure, call social services, but he's not being dragged off like a piece of baggage. The cop hesitated, but the other's voice came flat and cold. "You're obstructing law enforcement, Turner. You want us to cuff you right here?" The air tightened like a wire ready to snap. Daniel clung to Michael's shirt, his small fists trembling, his eyes wide with panic. Michael's gut told him, if he let go now, the boy would disappear into a system already poisoned by Victor's reach. That was when a black car rolled up to the gate. The window slid down, and Michael's chest knotted. Victor Hale, the town's polished philanthropist, sitting there like a king in his carriage. He didn't step out, just smiled, cold and thin, giving a small nod to one of the onlookers. An older woman shoved forward, her voice shrill. "That's him. I saw this man drag the boy out of the station, force him to come along." The crowd erupted, a storm of voices crashing over Michael. Faces turned hard, their stares cutting him down. From the car window, Victor's hand tapped against the door in a steady rhythm, like he was conducting his own private symphony, every note pushing the mob closer to frenzy. The cops turned back to him, their verdict plain. "Mr. Turner, you are officially under suspicion for child abduction. You'll have to come with us." The walls of the room seemed to close in. Michael stood frozen, disbelief twisting inside him. He looked down at Daniel, saw those pleading eyes begging him not to let go. And outside, Victor raised a cup of coffee, sipping slow, savoring the moment like a man who just claimed victory in a rigged game. Michael's fists clenched, his heart pounding so hard he felt it in his throat. He forced his voice low, gravel scraping out the words. "If you're taking me in, then at least let the boy speak one word." Daniel's lips parted, a whisper forming, but before the sound could escape, a gunshot cracked through the air outside. The bullet slammed into the doorframe, wood splintering inches from where Michael stood. The gunshot at the gate shook the whole house, and Michael's instincts flared alive like fire in his veins. He didn't stop to think. He scooped Daniel into his arms and burst through the back door. Behind him the cops shouted, the crowd roared, but Michael knew one truth. If he hesitated, both he and the boy would vanish under a charge carefully built to bury them. His steps pounded heavy, steady, cutting down the narrow alley that opened toward the western woods. Daniel's arms clung around his neck, breath ragged, eyes wet but silent, not a word slipping out. The woods swallowed them with a heartbeat all its own, branches closing overhead like ribs. Michael ran hard, lungs burning, every breath like swallowing flame. Behind him came the wail of sirens, the sweep of flashlights, the chatter of radios, and the slap of boots giving chase. He darted between trees, mind snapping back to night patrols overseas, when one wrong step meant the whole squad blown to dust. The crunch of dry leaves under his boots echoed with those old memories, ambushes that still haunted him. Then the thumping roar of a helicopter cut through the night, its blades tearing the sky to shreds. Michael hit the ground, pulling Daniel down into the rot and leaves. A blinding beam carved through the woods, slicing darkness apart, sweeping slow like the gaze of some great eye. Daniel trembled, small fingers clawing at Michael's shirt, lips moving without sound. Michael pressed close, whispering low, "Stay still, breathe quiet." His nerves stretched thin as wire, adrenaline burning. Every second the light passed over them, pounding harder in his temples. When the beam moved on, Michael seized the moment, lifting Daniel again and stumbling down the slope. His chest heaved, his legs screamed, but stopping meant death. In his mind he saw the faces of men he'd once run with, brothers who'd split up in the night, trying to draw fire away, only for him to be the one left standing at dawn. The weight of that memory pressed just as heavy now as the boy wrapped tight around his shoulders. Headlights flared through the trees ahead. Dogs barked, savage and loud, the circle tightening. Michael barreled down a hill, feet giving way, tumbling hard but never letting go of Daniel. They slid through dirt and wet leaves, the sting of rocks ripping at his side, the smell of damp earth thick in his nose. He forced himself up, muscles screaming, and kept moving. Daniel's wide eyes tracked the streaks of light closing in. Michael's voice came out rough, short. Hold on. We don't stop. Oh. The chopper swung back overhead, wind thrashing the treetops, snapping branches loose. Michael turned and caught the sight of uniforms in the distance, moving like a net. He understood, clear as day. This wasn't just a chase. He was standing against a whole system bent by Victor's hand. And all he had were 2 arms, an old pistol at his belt, and the boy shaking in his grip. No plans left, only survival, only the faint hope that truth still had a chance to be seen. He pressed himself behind a thick oak, heart hammering. The searchlight swept close, so close it painted the sweat running down his face. He shielded Daniel with his body, his breath locked tight in his chest. From above, a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Michael Turner, put the boy down and surrender." Cold words, already carving his fate. Michael shut his eyes for a second, then opened them sharp, hard as steel. He knew surrender meant Daniel disappearing forever. And then, just as the silence closed around that order, another light blinked from deeper in the woods. Not the cops, not the search teams. A flashlight, pulsing 3 quick beats in rhythm. A signal. A soldier's signal, one only a man who'd been through the fight would recognize. Michael caught the flicker of a flashlight. 3 blinks, short, long. A signal he'd only ever seen in the service. He tightened his grip on Daniel and moved toward it. A figure emerged between the trees, hood pulled low. A woman's voice, sharp and steady. "Follow me, quick." Michael froze for a beat, instinct sparking, but the helicopter's beam swept just behind them and left him no choice. He nodded and fell in step. She led them down a twisting path, slipping between thick trunks until the lights behind faded. They stopped before a shack of rusted tin and worn canvas, a relic of some old field press camp long abandoned. Inside, the woman pulled back her hood. Her face was sun-marked, her eyes bright and unflinching. "My name's Emily Ross, freelance reporter. I know who you are, Michael Turner. And I know Victor Hale is turning you into a kidnapper." Her tone carried no pity, only hard truth, and for a moment it cut through Michael's guard. He set Daniel on a rickety chair, his voice tight. "Why are you helping me?" Emily dug into her bag and pulled out a bundle of files bound with twine. "Because I've been tracking Victor for 2 years. And this boy, he's the key." Michael glanced at Daniel, the boy's eyes closed, his body limp with exhaustion. He snatched the folder, flipping through fast, his breath caught. Pages of lists stamped with the logo of Victor's freight company. Beside shipments were strange codes, with dates that lined up with the nights kids had gone missing in nearby towns. His gut clenched. One page stopped him cold. A scrawl in the margin. Subject, DR. Beneath it, a square box note. Ongoing trials. Keep silent. Michael's heart thudded. DR Daniel Reed. It wasn't coincidence. He snapped the file shut, eyes burning. "You realize what you're holding here?" Emily nodded, calm but sure. "I do. I lost a colleague chasing this trail. Victor turns everyone into liars. If you hadn't pulled that boy off the tracks, the name DR would already be crossed out." Michael's hand clenched tight. The loneliness of the past days cracked, a sliver of light breaking through. For the first time, someone else saw what he saw, and wasn't afraid to stand in it. Daniel stirred, blinking awake, his gaze still wild. He looked at Emily across the dim tent, hesitant, then whispered, "I saw him, in a big room. Victor." They said his name. His voice shook, short and broken, but it froze the air. Michael set a hand firm on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe now, but we've got to prove it." "Oh." Outside, the chopper noise had faded, leaving only the chorus of crickets. Emily leaned close, voice low. "I can hide you both for now, but we need a plan. If these files get out, Victor will burn the whole town to ash to bury the truth." Michael nodded, the fear in his eyes replaced by something harder, heavier. He finally had a reason to fight not for himself, but for the boy, and for the truth waiting to be torn out of the shadows. He laid the file on the table, breathing deep, his mind working through steps, angles, strategies, like setting up for another war. But before he could speak, a sound cracked the stillness outside the tent, the snap of a branch, slow and deliberate, like someone had already tracked them here. The night pressed heavy against the old press tent, the only light a dim oil lamp flickering on the rough wooden table. Daniel had drifted off, head tipped against the chair, while Emily kept watch by the door, ears tuned to every shift of the dark. Michael sat still, hands trembling as he opened a small cloth-bound notebook he'd carried since the day he left the service. The pages were yellowed, the ink smudged with sweat and desert dust. He read the words he had written years ago in Iraq, and each one cut like a blade pulled fresh. Night 47, Johnson caught around when I signaled the wrong flank. Night 89, Lee and Carver never came back. I swore I'd lead them safe, but all that was left were burned bodies and screams swallowed by smoke. Every line pressed down on him, squeezing his chest, dragging him back into fire, rubble, and the stench of blood cooked onto fabric. His jaw clenched as images surged, explosions shaking the ground, brothers falling beside him, and Johnson's final glance before vanishing into a storm of fire. Michael saw himself kneeling in sand again, shouting soundless, fists locked around a rifle that had failed to protect a single soul. He wondered if all these years he had lived or merely drifted like a shadow carrying weight no man could shed. The looks from townsfolk, the whispers that he was broken, they cut less than the thought that maybe they were right. There were nights he couldn't tell if he was awake or still caught in the loop of war. Emily glanced back, eyes softening at the sight of his pale face. He shook his head, pretending steady, though inside he was collapsing. His voice came low, ragged. I left my brothers to die once. Now I've dragged a child into danger. Maybe I'm repeating the same mistake. Emily's reply was quiet, just enough for him to hear. It's different, Michael. You're not running. You're holding on. Her words slipped past him like a breeze, too light to fight the roar of battle still raging in his skull, where Daniel's shaking figure on the tracks tangled with the ghosts of Iraq. Michael shut the notebook hard, his hands gripping until his nails dug blood from his palms. He looked at Daniel, at the scars lining the boy's small arms, and shuddered. If he failed, the boy would become another name scratched into a page, just like his brothers long ago. The thought tore at him fuel for resolve, but poison to his faith. Every time he braced for a fight, the past split it wide open. He stood, stepping toward the flap of the tent, gulping air from the damp night. Emily turned, meaning to speak, but stopped cold. His eyes burned red, staring into some abyss only he could see. Michael muttered, voice nearly broken, "Maybe it's me. Maybe everything I touch ends in loss." The words hung thick, pressing the room to stone. Emily's lips parted, but before she could answer, the growl of engines rolled from the distance. Tires crunched on gravel. Headlights swept across the trees and froze on the canvas wall, throwing Michael's shadow long and hard, shaped like a cross waiting for the nail. The rumble of engines faded into the night, leaving a heavy silence inside the tent. Michael sat again, sweat still clinging to his brow, the war journal clenched tight in his hand. Emily glanced at him, ready to speak, but both stayed quiet. In the corner, Daniel stirred awake, his eyes foggy from broken sleep. He pulled a stub of pencil from his pocket, tore a wrinkled sheet from the file, and began to sketch. Michael leaned in, watching the shaky lines take shape, steady and insistent, two rails running side by side. Daniel said nothing. He just drew. A stretch of track, then small square boxes along the side. Finally, he marked a symbol like an underground vault and drew an arrow pointing down. Michael moved closer, his voice rough. "Where did you see this?" Daniel stopped, swallowed hard, and whispered, "They took me there, underground, where the crates were sealed tight. They called it the cargo." The words landed like stones in Michael's chest. He knew what kind of cargo Victor's men trafficked. It was never anything lawful. Emily pulled the paper toward her, her brow furrowed. "This is line 12. The branch shut down back in '98. I've heard whispers of underground warehouses along it, but nobody ever proved it." Michael stared at the drawing, a chill running his spine. He remembered escorting trains in Iraq, loaded with arms, hidden depots buried under sand, men using war itself as cover for smuggling death. The past bled into the present, his knuckles whitening as his fists clenched. Daniel kept at it, circling 2 spots and scrawling the letter V by each. Michael asked, and the boy muttered, "I heard them say Victor's warehouses." The air inside froze. Emily jotted notes, whispering, "This is evidence. If we find these places, we could expose the whole network." Michael met her eyes, caught between doubt and a spark of hope. He'd stopped trusting in justice long ago, but seeing Daniel's small hand trembling, fighting to mark the truth, he understood the boy was his reason not to walk away. He bent down, level with the child's face, voice steady and low. "You're sure? If we go there, it'll be dangerous. Do you remember clear?" Daniel nodded, wide eyes filled with fear and a fragile resolve. Michael exhaled, heavy with ghosts. He saw his brothers lost in Iraq, but this time it wasn't soldiers with rifles. It was a child who'd never been protected, and he swore history wouldn't repeat. Emily closed the file, voice hushed. "Tomorrow night, I can get you to that abandoned stretch. But we have to move quiet. Victor owns the police. If word leaks, it'll be a trap." Michael nodded, eyes fixed on the map. The tangle of rails looked to him like a new battlefield, one he'd have to command if he meant to keep another life from being erased. The tent settled back into silence, the only sound the scratch of pencil on paper. Daniel added one last mark, a larger square, set apart, with shaky letters spelling Gate 3. Michael stared, his back cold. He'd heard that name whispered months ago, buried in reports of missing children. He turned to tell Emily, but before he could, a long train whistle drifted through the night. Strange. That line had been abandoned more than 20 years. The night whistle of the train still lingered in the air, as Michael stared at the paper Daniel had just drawn. His mind was a storm of memory and present danger, but one thing stood clear. If they wanted to push this through, they needed Emily. She was the one who could take a child's shaky sketches and turn them into evidence. At dawn, when Michael woke, the tent was too quiet. Daniel still slept curled in the corner, but Emily's pack was gone. He called her name, low, once, twice, nothing. A cold jolt hit his chest. He rushed outside. Fresh boot prints cut into the damp ground, trailing toward the dirt road. Not far off, tire marks pressed deep where a vehicle had just pulled away. Michael's teeth ground tight. His hand went to the pistol at his belt, though it did nothing against the helplessness rising in him. Victor had moved first. He didn't need to show his face, just stretch a hand, and everything around Michael shook. Back in the tent, Daniel was awake, eyes wide with worry. "Where is she?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. Michael sat beside him, hand on his shoulder, voice rough. "They took her. But we're going to find her." He opened the file again, eyes scanning, desperate for any thread that might lead to where Victor would keep her. His memory snapped back to hostage scenes overseas. The enemy always kept their leverage close, hidden enough to tighten the noose, but still under reach. Rage clawed through him. It was the same game, the same pain. He'd lost men to tricks like this, and now Emily stood in that place. Daniel tugged at his sleeve and handed over a folded scrap of paper pulled from his old jacket. "I kept this. They gave it to me, to scare me." Michael unfolded it. Scrawled across was a single line. "The one who writes the truth will vanish." Below it, the same V-mark Daniel had drawn on the map the night before. Michael's blood surged. Victor wanted him to know exactly who held the reins. He pressed his hands against his head, the weight crushing him, but when he looked at Daniel clutching the note with shaking fingers, Michael forced himself steady. This wasn't the desert. This was his own soil, and the fight was here. He stood, his voice iron. "If they think taking Emily breaks me, they're wrong. We'll go to the warehouses. We'll face them there." Daniel's eyes held fear, but a flicker of hope lit in them too. Michael packed fast, the pistol strapped tight, the file tucked under his coat. Each step carried the burn of anger held back. He knew Victor was daring him, forcing him to choose between his ally and the truth. The choice tore through him, same as Iraq, when he had left 2 men behind to save the rest. That decision haunted him for years. Not this time, not again. When night fell, Michael and Daniel slipped down the trail toward the abandoned line. The wind cut sharp through the trees, every step pulling him deeper into memories of war, but he pushed steady, lungs grinding through the cold. At the ridge, Michael raised an old pair of binoculars. Through the branches, he caught sight of dim lights flickering across a line of warehouses hidden behind chain link. And at the entrance, he saw her Emily, bound, head bowed, 2 guards standing close. Michael lowered the binoculars, eyes pulled tight as wire. Behind the fence, it wasn't just Emily tied to the dirt. It was 4 trucks lined in a row, engines rumbling low, back doors shut tight, waiting for a signal. His gut told him they were about to move the cargo, and Daniel would be swept up with it if he didn't act. He turned to the boy, voice low but urgent. "Stay here. If anything happens, run into the woods and don't look back." Daniel clutched his sleeve, eyes wide, but Michael pulled free, his gaze hard. He slid down the slope, gripping the old pistol. His pulse pounded in his ears, memories crashing back. A night in Baghdad, he'd thrown himself at a convoy hauling explosives. The result had been 3 brothers dead, and him walking away with a scar carved across his chest. Tonight, he had no squad, just a terrified boy on the ridge and a reporter tied as bait. He swallowed dry, inched forward until a headlight flashed across his face. A warehouse door swung open. 2 gunmen dragged Emily out, throwing her to the ground. One sneered, "This pawn's enough to drag him out." Michael didn't wait. He broke cover, raised his pistol, squeezed. The first round blew out a truck's headlight in a burst of sparks. Chaos ripped the yard wide open. Guards shouted, rifles cracked. Michael rolled to the side, fired again. 2 rounds smashing into a front tire, smoke billowing thick. Emily scrambled into the dark, crawling for cover. Michael barked, "Run!" But a second truck roared to life. Its back doors flew open, and Michael froze. A soldier yanked Daniel out, wrists bound. The boy kicked, screaming his name. Michael's blood iced. He rose and unleashed the rest of his magazine into the truck. Glass shattered. Sparks sprayed. The man holding Daniel staggered but kept pulling him inside. Michael charged, deafened by gunfire, choking on the stink of powder. A round ripped his shoulder, fire spreading down his arm, but he didn't break stride. He slammed into the soldier full force, knocking him flat, wrenching Daniel free. But another hand shot out from the truck, seizing Daniel's arm, tearing him back in a frenzy. The boy shrieked, trapped between them. Michael roared, yanked hard, bent low over him, and fired one last shot point blank. The grip loosened. A man fell back inside, silent. Daniel collapsed face first into the dirt. Michael wrapped him tight, chest heaving, blood soaking through his shirt. Engines roared alive, 3 trucks peeled out together, headlights burning white through the dark. One guard in the distance raised a radio, shouting, "He's here, he's got the boy." Michael dragged Daniel upright, pulled Emily to her feet. His head spun with one thought: if they were boxed in now, the 3 of them would never make it out. From far off came the rising wail of sirens. Blue and red lights flickered against the trees, closing fast, faster than any of them could run. The sirens swelled closer, blue and red lights bleeding across the trees. Michael pulled Daniel in tight, one arm locked around the boy, the other steadying Emily while the pistol smoked in his grip. He knew the circle would close in minutes. That was when Daniel whispered, breath ragged, "I know, another way." The boy led them around the warehouses, pressing to a crumbling brick wall. Michael staggered with blood soaking through his shirt, but he kept moving. Daniel bent low, pried up a broken plank, and revealed a dark hole beneath. There was no choice. Michael shoved Emily down first, then lifted Daniel and slid in after him. The stench of damp earth closed around them. Above, boots thundered, dogs barked, but down in the tunnel there was only the sound of their strained breathing. 3 people pushed to the edge. Michael dragged himself forward, each cough tearing up blood, burning his throat raw. Emily turned to steady him, but he waved her off. "Keep moving. I'm behind you." His voice stayed firm, a soldier's command, even as the light drained from his eyes. The tunnel stretched narrow and long, finally opening into a hollow behind the ridge. They spilled out into the wet grass, rolling down the slope. Michael dropped to his knees, coughing until his hand came up slick with red. Daniel clutched him tight, panicked. "Don't die." Michael set a hand on the boy's shoulder, forcing a bitter smile. "I still owe you. I'm not done yet." Emily pulled them up, signaling that they had to keep moving before the net closed. They slipped along a dirt track, vanishing into a deeper stretch of woods. Michael stumbled, lungs heavy, the edges of his vision dimming. Old memories flooded back, hauling wounded comrades, listening to their breath fade into silence. He hated it, hated being the one who faltered. War didn't leave room for weakness, and now he was the one needing to be carried, but he refused to fall, not with Daniel still depending on him. At last they found an old wooden shack deep in the trees. They ducked inside. Emily pressed to his wound, her voice tight. "You've lost too much blood. If we don't stop it..." Michael cut her off, voice cracked but certain. "We're not safe yet. Let me sit. Check the file." He leaned against the wall, each cough driving knives into his chest. Daniel sat beside him, eyes glassy, fumbling through his jacket. He pulled free an old cloth, but instead a wad of crumpled papers slipped and hit the floor. Emily stooped, lifted them, and froze. It was a long list, scrawled with names of children, each marked with the dates they vanished. Some names were slashed out in red ink. Michael's hand shook as he traced the lines. He recognized them, kids from the town, the same faces that once laughed by the station, now reduced to cold print. His fists clenched, eyes burning with rage and despair. My God, how many? Daniel bowed his head, voice no louder than a breath. "I saw that list. Victor had it. I ran. I took it." Each word sank heavy, Michael's heart dragging down like stone. He looked to Emily, and both knew this wasn't one kidnapping. It was a whole network, with Daniel standing as the witness. Michael slumped back, coughing hard, blood spilling at the corner of his mouth. Emily set a hand on his shoulder, but before she spoke, the sound of branches snapping echoed outside. Heavy, deliberate. Then a voice, cold and familiar, cut through the dark. "I told you, Turner. Wherever you hide, I'll find you." Michael forced himself to guide Emily and Daniel away from the shack, his steps dragging like each one might snap his frame in two. The shouts of men behind them faded as they cut across a slope and followed a narrow path toward a broken brick building, the old clinic, left to rot back when the town was still alive. Inside it reeked of dust and mildew, but it was shelter, at least for a while. Michael dropped onto a wooden table, his breath ragged, hands trembling from blood loss. Emily dug through a rusted cabinet, found a first aid box, and pulled out scraps of bandage. He gritted his teeth as she pressed down hard on the wound. The blood still seeped, but slower now. Daniel hovered nearby, clutching the crumpled list he'd picked up from the shack, his young face tight with worry. When Michael caught his breath, he reached for the papers. Under the weak glow of Emily's flashlight, the names jumped out, each one cutting deep. Then his hand froze. His eyes locked on a line that made his chest seize. Sarah Coleman, 12 years old. He whispered it again, shaking, as if it couldn't be true. Sarah, the daughter of David Coleman, his brother in arms, the man who'd saved him in Iraq by shoving him clear of the blast and staying behind to burn. Michael had carried that debt for years, a wound that never closed. And now, David's little girl was written in Victor's ledger of the lost. His head dropped onto the table, chest tight, air catching in his throat. Emily saw his face and asked softly, "That name, it means something to you?" Michael lifted his head, voice cracked and dry. "That girl's father died for me. I can't let history repeat. If Sarah's alive, I'll drag her out, whatever it takes." For the first time since he came back, there was a glint in his eyes, not just pain, but duty. Daniel watched him, then laid his small hand on Michael's larger one. "We'll save them. Not just me, all of them." Michael breathed deep, his fist tightening around the list like it was a vow. He turned to Emily. "We've got to find proof of where Sarah's been taken. If we show it, the town can't look away." Emily nodded, though her face stayed heavy. "Victor won't leave tracks out in the open, but this list is a start." Michael leaned back against the wall, his body breaking down even as his spirit steadied. These children weren't just victims. They were his reason to stand again, the way he once stood for his brothers. Outside, the wind howled through broken panes, rattling rusted metal like the echo of gunfire. Michael closed his eyes and saw David's face, then another face he'd never seen, Sarah's, blurred but calling. Past and present braided together, binding him in place. The room was quiet but for Emily's pen scratching notes. Daniel sat across from him, staring at the list as if searching for a memory buried inside. Suddenly Daniel's head shot up, his face pale. He pointed with a trembling finger at one of the names. "That one, I remember. I heard them say it at the warehouse. They said tomorrow night that name would leave town." Michael leaned forward, eyes racing down the page until they stopped. The letters glared back at him, clear as day. Sarah Coleman. After Sarah Coleman's name was spoken, the air inside the abandoned clinic thickened. Michael sat frozen, fists locked around the list, eyes bloodshot as if drowning in old ghosts. Emily said nothing more. She folded the papers and stepped into a corner where light leaked through, pulling an old laptop from her bag. "I need to verify this," she said quickly, her voice tight but steady. Michael only nodded, sagging back against the wall, breath rattling, while Daniel pressed close to his side, silent and still. Emily tapped into a military database she'd once hacked through back channels. The screen flickered, but data lines scrolled. She searched Victor Hale's name, and her eyes widened. There it was. Victor, listed as a key donor to a Veterans Support Foundation, dressed up as charity. But when she dug deeper, the trail of money ran dark. Funds diverted to logistics contracts in Iraq, right when Michael and his unit were deployed. The more she scrolled, the colder she felt. File after file marked MIA, missing in action, flagged in strange ways. Names Michael had just read on that list appeared again here, crossed out, tagged as closed. Emily muttered, "God, he wasn't just running this town. He had his hands in the army too." Michael heard, his grip tightening until blood welled under his nails. His growl came low. "So what we lost out there wasn't only to the enemy. We were bled by one of our own." Emily spun the laptop to face him. "See? Proof he bought his way into the system. These missing files weren't lost. They were buried, changed, locked out of sight. And here, David Coleman." Michael stiffened as if struck. His brother's name was there, not listed as a hero, but as a case erased to cover a scheme. He clenched his teeth, veins straining at his temple. Daniel watched them, voice barely a whisper. "I heard them say Victor," he called soldiers, "the best supply." Michael turned, fire in his stare. Now he knew Victor wasn't just a smuggler. He was a man who turned war into a chessboard, feeding off soldiers and still playing with children's lives. Emily typed fast, then stopped. "I just found an address. A private storage facility he owns. If this is right, the original files are there." Michael pushed himself upright, his body shaking from blood loss, but his voice rough and sure. "Take me there. If he buried the truth, I'll drag it into the light." Emily nodded, firm. no longer just a reporter but a comrade. Daniel looked between them, his young eyes hardened with a grit far beyond his years. For a moment it felt like their purpose had fused, everything pointing to one target. Then it came the sound that froze the room. Heavy boots, slow and steady, striking the hallway. A flashlight beam swept across cracked tiles, stopping at the very door that hid them. The steel steps in the hallway finally faded, but the air stayed tight in their throats. Emily shut the laptop, raised a finger for silence, then whispered, "We've got to move. Victor's on the trail." Michael nodded, though inside he knew the fight ahead wasn't only about guns, it was about the weight of opinion pressing down on him. They slipped out of the abandoned clinic, worked their way through back alleys, and when they came out onto Main Street, he saw it plain. The trap was already set. Flyers were plastered across lampposts and storefronts. Warning: Michael Turner, unstable veteran, dangerous to the community. Underneath was a picture of him from years ago, face tight, eyes sunken. Handbills littered the ground, and townsfolk bent to pick them up, glancing at him with wary stares. Emily tugged his sleeve, pulling his head down, whispering, "He's turning you into the predator in their eyes." Michael's jaw locked, his heart hammering. He'd lived with suspicion since he came home, but this was different. This was organized, deliberate. At the cafe across the street, a group of men leaned together, voices carrying just enough for him to hear. "Told you he wasn't right. Heard he's still got weapons stashed. Dangerous as hell." Another chimed in, "Those vets, they all snap eventually. One day they'll just start shooting." Every word hit Michael like a bullet without sound. Emily shook her head, telling him not to answer. Daniel clung to his hand, wide-eyed. Michael bent low, whispered, "Don't listen, just trust me." But inside, the loneliness pressed hard. He remembered nights in Iraq, when the radios went dead and command marked their unit as missing. That feeling washed back, being cut off, unseen, abandoned. And now, right here on his own soil, he was branded as a madman by the very town he once defended. Emily scrolled her phone, checking the local feed. Her face darkened. Victor pushed it all online. Posts say you kidnap children, that you're violent, lost in war flashbacks. People are sharing it like wildfire. Michael closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath. He knew Victor was firing more than bullets. He was trying to kill his honor with words. And once the crowd believed, any proof Michael uncovered would be drowned out. Down the street, a patrol unit rolled up. Emily yanked him and Daniel into an alley, pressing against a cracked wall. Michael's hand went to the pistol under his coat, but he knew he couldn't pull the trigger on his own townsman. He wasn't the terrorist Victor painted him to be. He had one path left: find undeniable proof before he was shut off completely. Daniel dug into his jacket, pulling out the sketch of the rail yard map. His finger shook as he pointed to the mark labeled Gate 3. His voice was a thin whisper. "If we look here, there'll be something to show the truth." Michael stared at it, eyes sparking with a flash of hope. Maybe the last chance lay right there. Then, from the mouth of the alley, a police loudspeaker blared, "Michael Turner, you are wanted for kidnapping and endangering the public. Step out with your hands up, or we will open fire." Michael set his mind on Gate 3, but the path cut through the veterans' cemetery on the edge of town. Night had settled deep, wind whipping across the rows of stones carved with names he once saluted. Emily moved ahead, checking the way, while Michael guided Daniel close, his eyes sweeping the dark corners. This ground had once been sacred to him, a resting place for brothers carved into granite. But tonight it was bait, a trap waiting to spring. At the center, beneath the tall monument etched with the fallen floodlights snapped alive. A loudspeaker barked, "Michael Turner, drop your weapon." From all sides, cops and men in black stepped out, closing ranks. Emily froze. Daniel's grip on Michael's hand turned his knuckles white. Michael raised his gun but didn't aim, scanning. He saw it. This wasn't just police work. Behind them, Victor sat in a black SUV, his face lit in a pale grin. Victor tapped the glass with his finger, then gave a small signal. A roar shook the ground. Steel cables hidden in shadow pulled tight. The giant stone monument tilted, groaning, then toppled straight toward Michael and Daniel. Instinct took over. Michael clutched the boy and lunged sideways, stone cracking air inches from them. The monument smashed down, earth splitting, dust exploding. By a margin of inches they lived, but death had kissed close. Chaos broke loose, shots cracked, muzzle flashes tearing the dark. Michael rolled with Daniel down a slope, gravel cutting his face, lungs choking on dust. His heart pounded, the memory of comrades crushed under concrete in Baghdad flashing hot and raw. That helpless weight crushed him again, like war had followed him home. He let out a guttural roar, half fury, half despair, and fired back, each round flaring in the night. Emily dragged Daniel behind a gravestone, yelling, "You can't fight them all, we need to move." But Michael heard nothing except the thunder of rifles and the beat of his heart. He emptied shots, forcing the line to duck, but there were too many. Victor stayed back, calm, watching as though he'd written the ending already. Michael's body gave way. A round hit close, dirt spraying his legs. He stumbled, fell to one knee, coughing blood that smeared his hand. Daniel broke from cover, grabbed his arm, screaming his name over the din. Michael tried to rise, every muscle shaking, his breath shredded. He knew he was nearly spent, and this time he might not hold the line. In that flicker of collapse, he saw David Coleman's face, flickering in memory, like a brother's ghost, telling him not to quit. Michael clenched his jaw, pulled Daniel in tight, and whispered, "If there's an opening, run. Don't come back." But Daniel shook his head hard, tears in his eyes, voice steady with fire. "I won't leave you." Those words stabbed Michael's chest with pain and hope together. Then Victor's voice rolled cold through the loudspeaker. "Take him down, but keep the boy. He's still worth something." And as the order echoed, a red laser sight locked steady over Michael's chest. The red beam still held on Michael's chest, but just as the trigger was about to be pulled, Emily leapt from behind the stone, raising her phone high. "You're live right now," she shouted, her voice cutting through the gunfire. The feed streamed straight onto the town's network, hundreds tuning in to watch the fallen monument, the armed men surrounding an unarmed veteran. Comments flooded the screen. "What is this? Why are they aiming guns at the man who saved that boy at the station? What's Victor Hale doing here?" The air shifted. Inside the SUV, Victor leaned forward, his face twisting. He waved furiously, signaling to lower weapons, but the damage was done. The crowd online was watching, judgment forming in real time. His men faltered, some dropping rifles, others backing into the shadows. Michael staggered upright, blood still slick at his lips, but in his eyes flickered something new, hope. He didn't need words. The lens spoke for him. Emily kept the phone steady, swinging the camera over the rubble of the monument, the names carved of the dead, her voice firm. "This is how they treat their soldiers." On the streets beyond, people began to gather, phones raised, more streams pouring out. The tide of opinion shifted like water breaking a dam. Victor shouted inside his car, scrambling to claw back control, but the current had slipped from his hands. Michael pulled Daniel close, the three of them darting toward the tree line, their breaths pounding louder than the noise behind. At the edge of the woods, Michael collapsed, coughing hard, crimson staining his sleeve. Emily knelt at his side, still holding her phone live until the signal thinned. Daniel sat across from them, pale, clutching the crumpled list in his small hands. His lips trembled as he looked from Michael to Emily, then whispered, "I can't hide it anymore." Michael forced his head up, rasping, "Hide what?" Daniel bit down, tears breaking free, his voice shaking. "Victor, he's my uncle." The words dropped like a bomb, freezing them both. Emily's mouth fell open, eyes wide, while Michael gripped the boy's shoulders, shaking. "What did you say?" Daniel sobbed, repeating clear, sharp, "He's my uncle, and he's the one who took me to that warehouse." Michael felt his blood turn cold. In the boy's eyes he saw not just fear but the raw wound of betrayal by blood. Emily reeled, yet her mind caught the weight of it. She nodded tight to Michael. "If this is true, then he isn't just a trafficker. He's a man who betrayed his own family." Michael's jaw locked, his chest burning with Daniel's pain mingling with his own shame of being cast out by the town. His whisper came rough as broken glass. "Then this fight isn't about survival anymore. It's about ending him." The words barely left his mouth before headlights split the dark at the far end of the woods. A loudspeaker boomed, low and threatening. "Hand the boy over, Michael, or the whole town will see you really are the madman I say you are." The night pressed down heavy on the tree line, Victor's headlights cutting across like a blade, before veering off and fading into another road. Michael forced himself upright, blood-streaked hand gripping Daniel's shoulder. He knew if they hesitated, every scrap of proof would be wiped clean. Emily signaled and led them across a wet field, toward a cluster of warehouses that leaned along the old rail spur. Rusted sheet metal walls, a steel door with a heavy lock. Michael knew this was the hub Daniel had drawn on his map. They kept low, shadows moving in silence. Michael pried at the lock with his combat knife, hands shaking from blood loss but stubborn as iron. A sharp click snapped, and the door groaned open, breathing out darkness thick with oil and old wood. They stepped inside, beams of flashlight cutting the gloom, and froze. Row after row of containers stacked, each stenciled cargo V with long numbers. Emily cracked one open. Inside weren't goods. There were children's clothes, medical cards, mugshot photos. Michael lifted a thick file, flipping quick through its pages. Each sheet listed a child's name, date of transfer, storage location. His heart thumped hard when he saw the name Sarah Coleman again and again. His hand shook, eyes burning red, the ghost of David hammering back into him. Emily raised her phone, snapping frantic shots. Her voice trembled but held steady. "This is evidence. No one can deny this." Michael bit down, his words gravel. "He trades children like freight, turns lives into numbers. He'll pay." Daniel hovered close, his eyes wide, his small hand touching a photo clipped in a file. His whisper cracked. "I remember her. She was locked in the same room." Michael gripped the boy's shoulder, rage simmering under his skin. He scanned the room, spotting a steel cabinet sealed with triple locks. No thought he drew and fired. Metal shrieked, lock burst, and the doors swung wide. Inside, original files stamped with military seals, proof Victor had been pulling strings since the war itself. Emily gasped, breath shaking. My God, he built an empire on bones. Wind slid through cracks in the sheet steel, carrying a chill of warning. Michael knew time was gone. He stuffed files into a pack, voice clipped. "We move now." Emily nodded, raising her phone to capture footage of the containers, every label burned into evidence. Daniel tugged at Michael's coat, eyes wide. "I hear engines." And they did, the low growl rolling closer, headlights beginning to rake across the dark. Michael's gut turned cold. Victor wouldn't leave this place unguarded. He motioned, and they killed their light, bolting for a rear door. But as they pushed it open, beams of white light slammed into their faces. A row of black vehicles blocked the way, silhouettes of armed men stepping out, rifles lifted. The air sealed shut around them. At the center, Victor emerged, calm, standing tall in the floodlights, that faint grin crawling across his lips. His voice carried, slow and deliberate. "You thought you'd uncovered my secret, Turner? No, this is only the trap." Victor stood tall in the floodlights, calm as if the whole board was already his. He didn't order the guns to fire. Instead, he raised a hand for silence. Two heavy-set men stepped from the dark, yanking Daniel away from Michael. The boy fought, eyes wide with panic, but Victor walked forward, lowering his voice to a quiet, chilling sweetness. "Daniel, you've suffered long enough. With him, you're just a hostage, just an excuse for him to stir up chaos. With me, you'll finally have a real family." Michael roared, lunging forward, but rifles shoved him back. His wound split open, blood spilling under his boots, yet he fought to stay upright, eyes burning like coals. "Don't listen to him. He turned you into cargo. Daniel, look at me." But Victor was practiced, smooth. He tilted his head, laid a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, words dripping like honey laced with venom. "I'm the only blood you've got. Blood never abandons blood. Remember, who brought you into the big house when you were small? Who gave you clothes, food? It wasn't him, it was me." Daniel trembled, lips working soundless. Emily shouted from behind, voice raw. "Daniel, he didn't raise you, he caged you. You told us yourself." But in the strobe of headlights, the boy's face looked lost. He glanced at Michael, the man who'd pulled him off the tracks, carried him through gunfire, and then back at Victor, the uncle, the captor, the twisted kin. Tears spilled down his cheeks. I don't know who to believe." Michael's heart split open. He wanted to scream, but his lungs burned, his breath ragged. He shook his head, voice hoarse, every word cutting. "Trust your heart, Daniel. Real family doesn't put you on the rails to die. Real family doesn't make you a name on a list." Victor slid in, smooth as a serpent. "But I'll give you a home, a future. Leave him. Come with me. I am your true family." The moment stretched like forever. Daniel's eyes darted, wet, searching. Then he took one step toward Victor. Michael froze, world collapsing in on itself. Emily gripped his arm tight, afraid he'd charge headlong into ruin. Victor smiled wide in triumph, crouching to embrace the boy, murmuring just loud enough for Michael to hear, "You see, Turner, war took your brothers. Peace will take the boy you tried to save." Michael dropped to his knees, chest convulsing with coughs, blood staining his lips. He couldn't even shout anymore. Only one word escaped, a whisper. "Daniel." The child looked back, torn, but his small hand was already locked inside Victor's grip. The floodlights flared bright, engines roared alive, and at that instant, Victor gestured. The back of a truck slammed open, revealing cages stacked inside. From one, a bound figure lifted her head, eyes wide with terror, the face of Sarah Coleman. The truck engines roared, then faded into the night, leaving only the whistle of cold wind cutting across the abandoned tracks. Victor barked an order. Two of his men dragged Daniel out, bound his arms and legs, and laid the boy right across the rusty rails. Moonlight fell pale on the child's terrified eyes. Victor strolled forward, cigar glowing between his teeth, smoke curling into ghostly rings. "Turner," he said, slow and deliberate, "I want you to see it clear. Every game ends where it began." Michael staggered forward, Emily catching his arm. His chest wound had split, blood soaking his shirt, but his eyes burned with fire. He rasped out, "Let him go, Victor. You want me, kill me." Victor laughed, a dry, hollow sound that carried over the tracks. "Kill you? No. I want you alive. I want you to watch all your hope crushed. You saved him once, but this time you won't." He jerked his chin, and down the line a floodlight blazed on. The whistle of an oncoming train floated nearer, grinding steel echoing like fate itself. Daniel thrashed, muffled cries strangled by the gag. His wide eyes locked on Michael's, desperate, ripping at the soldier's heart. Michael tried another step, but two rifles leveled across his path. Emily's hands shook as she raised her phone, live streaming, voice cracking. "Do you all see this? This is Victor Hale, tying a child to the tracks." Victor didn't flinch. He smirked, calling out loud enough for the lens. "Keep filming. Let the town see their broken soldier, powerless." The train's scream grew sharper, iron grinding louder with every second. Michael's vision blurred with memories, the collapsing monument that nearly crushed him and Daniel, the faces of comrades buried under rubble overseas. He knew he couldn't freeze again. Summoning what strength remained, he lunged, slamming one guard down, wrenching the carbine free. Gunfire ripped through the night, muzzle flashes splitting the dark. Emily screamed. Daniel writhed. Victor backed off but never lost his grin. Michael dropped to one knee, firing precise bursts. The ropes binding Daniel's wrists snapped loose. His own blood poured hot, clouding his sight, but he pressed on. The train's horn shrieked closer, less than a minute left. Daniel tumbled off the rail, Michael throwing himself forward, clutching the boy, rolling hard into the dirt. A thunder of steel roared past, wind slamming them flat, grit and smoke choking the air. Michael gasped, clutched tight around Daniel, the child pressed to his chest, like the only thing left in the world. As the train stormed by, and the dust cleared, Michael forced his head up, his relief froze to ash. Across the tracks, caught in the strobe of headlights, Victor held Emily tight, a blade flashing at her throat. Victor dragged Emily back toward the freight train that had just thundered by, the knife pressed hard against her throat. Michael clutched Daniel tight, his heartbeat pounding like it might explode. No time to breathe. He lunged forward, catching the iron rung on the last car as it picked up speed, yanking the boy with him. Wind whipped his face raw, steel shrieked beneath the wheels, and the horn's wail sounded like a death bell ringing for them all. Victor hauled Emily onto a middle car, glaring at Michael across the rumbling gap. "Come on then, Turner," he called, voice cold as stone. "End it here, on the very tracks you chose." Michael hauled himself up, hands bleeding as they scraped against steel. He shoved Daniel into the safety of an open compartment and barked out, "Hold on tight, don't step out." The boy cried back, voice cracking, "Don't leave me." But Michael was already climbing onto the roof, rising into the gale, facing Victor head-on. One broken soldier, one treacherous kin, standing across from each other on a train tearing blind into the night. Victor lunged, knife flashing silver. Michael twisted away, but the old wound tore open, blood spraying hot down his chest. He roared, grabbing with the last of his strength, locking Victor into a brutal struggle on the iron roof. Their bodies slammed against the steel, breath ragged, fists hammering, the stink of oil and smoke choking the air. Emily, bound, crawled toward the edge, her voice hoarse but fierce. "Michael, don't let him breathe another second." Victor heaved, shoving Michael back toward the edge, the wheels roaring just inches below. Michael's mind filled with faces, the children on that list, Sarah Coleman's name, the comrades lost in fire, and Daniel sobbing in the car behind him. Something surged up from a place deeper than pain. With a savage twist, he wrenched the knife free and drove his fist hard into Victor's jaw. The man staggered, slipped, clawing at the side rail with desperate fingers. His eyes burned with hatred as he shouted, "If I fall, the boy will still belong to me." Michael gritted his teeth, grabbed Victor's wrist, and snarled through blood and fire, "No, he'll have a real family." With one final heave, he hurled Victor down into the black abyss. The train howled across a narrow bridge, Victor's body vanishing into the gorge below. Michael collapsed, chest heaving, vision blurring. Emily dragged herself close, biting through her ropes, throwing her arms around him. Daniel crawled out, clutching Michael's shoulders, sobbing into his back. "Don't leave me, please don't." Michael wheezed, managed a faint smile, his trembling hand resting on the boy's head. For the first time, he felt the debt to his fallen brother's ease, because at least one child had been pulled back from the shadows. But the train barreled on, and through the haze of pain and wind, Michael squinted ahead. The light from the engine cut across the tracks, and what he saw froze him. The rails didn't continue. They ended, jagged and broken, dangling over nothing. The train screeched to a halt, just short of the broken tracks, sparks spraying from the steel wheels, the weight of the cars groaning against the cliff's edge. Somehow it stopped before plunging into the ravine. Michael collapsed onto the iron floor, gasping for air that barely came. Emily and Daniel pulled him out, the three of them spilling onto the cold ground, lying there under a fading moon as the night gave way to the first light of dawn. Victor was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the gorge, and with him the empire of trafficking he had hidden for years. But the victory didn't come from the final bullet or the last punch. It came from dragging the truth into the open. Emily tore open the pack, pulling out the files they had grabbed from the warehouse. Her hands trembled as she flipped through page after page until she froze at a stamped section marked in red. She read it aloud, her voice raw. Daniel Reed, biological son of Victor Hale. Status, abandoned. Note, add to shipment list, do not disclose. The silence was crushing. Daniel sat frozen, his wide eyes filling until the tears spilled over. Michael wrapped the boy in his arms, his chest tight with a grief deeper than wounds. He had known from the start something was wrong, but never imagined the man pulling the strings would abandon his own blood, hiding him in the dark just to keep a spotless mask. Emily raised her phone, live again, her voice breaking but firm. This is the truth. Victor Hale was not only trafficking children, he abandoned his own son to cover his crimes. These records carry his signature, his seal. People need to see this. The reaction was immediate. Outrage erupted. The story spread through town and beyond, drowning out the whispers about the crazy soldier and turning every eye against Victor. The police could no longer deny it. Investigators moved in. Michael sat silent. Daniel clutched tight against him, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the horizon. He muttered, half to himself, "The war out there was only half the fight. The other half is holding on to our humanity right here at home." He thought of the comrades lost in Iraq, of David Coleman, of Sarah the girl still missing. The promises made to the dead had become responsibilities to the living. Daniel tilted his face up through the tears and whispered, "Am I still his son?" Michael tightened his hold, his voice steady as stone. "No. From now on, you're your own, and I won't let anyone turn you into cargo again." Emily closed the files, exhaling hard. She knew this was far from finished. The list in their hands stretched on with dozens of names, many not yet crossed out. She set the papers down on the dirt and looked at Michael. "We pulled Daniel out. But how many more kids are still in the dark? This story isn't over." Michael stared at the pages, his eyes blazing with a new kind of resolve. From a distance, the church bell tolled, ushering in the morning. But for Michael, Emily, and Daniel, it wasn't peace. It was a reminder. The battle still stretched ahead, not with bombs and bullets, but with the fight to pull every child out of the grip of men like Victor. Michael stood, lifting Daniel into his arms, his gaze fixed on the horizon. And as the morning wind swept across the fields, a final page fluttered from the pile, landing face up in the dirt. One name remained untouched, not crossed out. Sarah Coleman. Oh. The story leaves behind a reminder that truth sometimes hides right behind the most familiar faces, like Victor, abandoning his own son to bury his crimes. The image of Daniel tied to the tracks again, echoing that first moment, shows how cruelty can repeat itself if people don't have the courage to stand up. For those who've lived through upheaval, the real terror isn't just bombs and bullets overseas, it's the silence and the turning away of your own community. The lesson is simple. Justice only lives when we have the backbone to face the darkness head on, and those names still uncrossed on the list remind us this duty is far from over. If you feel this story needs to be heard by more people, leave a comment and share it. And don't forget to subscribe so we can build a wide circle of support together for the soldiers who return home.